I think a lot of really good coaches are quietly burning out, just trying to stay visible online because everywhere you look, someone is telling you to post more, create more, just show up more, chase the algorithm harder with more reels, hooks, content, noise. And yet, despite all of that visibility, so many brilliant coaches are still struggling to create real connection, real trust, and actual clients, because visibility is not the same thing as trust. And somewhere along the way, online marketing stopped being about relationships and started becoming a performance. But then something completely different happens when someone hears you speak on a podcast for 30 or 40 minutes. They don't just hear your voice, they can feel your energy, your story, your perspective. And they're not just consuming content, they feel connected to, because otherwise they wouldn't listen. And that can change everything because people rarely buy because they saw one post, right? They buy because they trust you. And trust is built through depth. And that is not just frequency. Honestly, this is why I fell in love with podcast guesting in the first place, because I realized one powerful conversation could do more for relationship building than 30 days of social media content ever could. One conversation, one story, one moment where somebody that's listening thinks, this person actually gets me. And that is the moment authority starts compounding. So, in today's episode, I want to show you how to create that intentionally. I'm going to walk you through the framework that we use inside the Podcast Profits ecosystem to help coaches and consultants turn podcast guesting into relationship driven authority, trust, and real business growth. Because in today's world, the businesses that grow fastest are not necessarily the loudest. They are the ones that people trust the most. So grab a coffee, let's dive in. This is a solo episode today, it's just me. Now, it really is happening online right now that really makes me think that good coaches are out there questioning themselves. And maybe you have felt that too, right? As I said, we just feel that we should be doing more. You need 3 reels a day. You've got to change these hooks. You need to use trending audio. There's just so much. You need to go viral. Really? And apparently, if you're not dancing or the pointing at captions or spending thousands a month on ads, you're somehow behind. And I honestly feel that there are coaches out there feeling exhausted. They're not lazy, they're not inconsistent, they're just exhausted because they're doing everything that they've been told to do. And they are posting every day, they are creating content constantly, trying to stay visible, trying to stay relevant. Yet, behind the scenes, they're still wondering, why isn't this turning into clients? And I think the problem is deeper than just strategy. I think somewhere along the way, online marketing lost its connection because visibility is not the same thing as trust. And this is the part that hardly anybody is talking about. You can have thousands of views and still have no real relationship with your audience. You can go completely viral, but it's not converting into sales. You can be consistent for years and still feel invisible. But then something interesting happens when someone hears you speak on a podcast for 30 or 40 minutes. They get to see you because you are showing up authentically. And they're not, as I said, they're not just consuming content, they're feeling connected to you. If they don't like what they hear, they're going to switch off. So the beauty of podcast guesting is that you get to show up to those who are interested. And look, people aren't buying stuff based on something they saw you post on Facebook. It's all about building that trust. Yeah, in my opinion, especially with the rise of AI, people are just doing more. Whereas if you're going to show up in front of an audience who already trusts the host and is already tuning in regularly, that is far more powerful than creating 60 posts in a month. Now, I really focused on being the host. Yeah, doing some solo episodes, but that's still to my audience. The realization of, well, why not get in front of a new audience? I can do that every single week. That is far more powerful than just focusing on what you're going to post on all these different social media platforms. One, do more for that relationship building than, yeah, your whole month of continual social media posts. One conversation, one story, one moment where somebody listening in just thinks, yeah, oh, I think this person actually gets me. And that's where the magic happens. And today, oh my God. I think a lot of really good coaches are quietly burning out, just trying to stay visible online. Welcome back to the Podcast Profits Unleashed podcast, where we talk about guesting as a great way to get in front of your ideal audience and all about authority infrastructure, right? How to do that rather than just posting continually on social media. Because I truly believe there's something happening online right now that honestly, it's making lots of really good coaches question themselves. They're burnt out. Maybe you felt this too. Instagram. Suddenly it feels like everyone is telling you need to post more. You need 3 reels a day. You need a content machine, better hooks, trending audio, all this stuff. Everybody's trying to go viral. And if you're not dancing or pointing at captions or spending thousands a month on ads, you're somehow behind. And honestly, yeah, I think there are many coaches out there who are simply exhausted. Not lazy, not inconsistent, just exhausted because they're doing everything they've been told to do. They're posting every day, they're creating content. These days with AI, it's so easy and quick to create content, or so you think. So there's just more of it. And you're trying to stay visible, trying to stay relevant, yet behind the scenes, they're still wondering, why isn't this turning into clients? Maybe they've had a post that's gone viral. Likes and comments do not equal money in the bank. And I think the problem is deeper than just strategy. I think somewhere along the way, online marketing just lost connection because visibility is not the same thing as trust. And this is the part hardly anyone is talking about. You can have thousands of views and still have no real relationship with your audience. You can go viral, but it might not be converting into sales. You can be consistent for years and still feel invisible. But then Something really interesting can happen when someone hears you speak on a podcast for 30 or 40 minutes. They don't just hear your voice, they can feel your energy, your stories, your perspective, your heart, because they're not just consuming content. They will feel connected to you when you do this right. And that can change everything because people rarely buy because they saw one post. They buy because they trust you. And trust is built through depth, not just the frequency of your posts. Now, honestly, this is why I fell in love with podcast guesting in the first place. I've been a host for what, over 5 years now? I've done some solo episodes like this one, but I wasn't really utilizing podcast guesting. And it's crazy because I realized that, hey, this is one really powerful platform. You could have one interview that could do more for relationship building than 30 days of social media posts. Just one conversation, one story, one moment where the listener thinks to themselves, oh, I think this person actually gets me. That's where the magic lies. And today, I want to show you how to create that intentionally, not accidentally. I'm going to walk you through the exact framework that we teach inside our Podcast Profits ecosystem, if you like. The same framework I've seen transform the way coaches attract clients, and the same psychology I've seen work over and over again through my work with entrepreneurs, experts, podcast hosts, and through everything I've learned working alongside the team at ClickFunnels. Because this isn't just about getting visible, it's about becoming unforgettable to the right people. So grab a coffee and let's dive in. Now, I've been seeing this pattern for a while, and I myself just thought I need to just work harder. At one point, a few years ago, I increased this podcast to 2, then to 3 episodes a week because I just thought I needed to do more. And it ain't necessarily. And I do feel that some of the smartest, most talented coaches out there I knew were still struggling to grow their business. And it wasn't because they weren't brilliant. It wasn't because they didn't care. And it definitely wasn't because their offers didn't work. It was because people didn't really know them. Most people had burnt through their warm list, right? How do you get in front of new people? The quickest way would be to guest on a podcast who already has your audience. Their marketing had become transactional. Lots of tips, motivational quotes, random reels. Look, I've done it myself. 3 ways to posts. They're always chasing the algorithm. Everything has been built for attention, but not for connection. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, the depth disappeared. And then something happened that completely shifted the way I looked at marketing. Every time someone heard me speak on a podcast, the conversations were different. They weren't just surface level conversations. And this wasn't just from people who listened to the podcast, but actually the hosts themselves, having real conversations. People just felt like they already knew me. And I've heard so many people talk about strategy before, but the way you can explain it on a podcast can finally make it click to the listener. This really fascinated me because I realized I'd been leaving a lot of money on the table. I'd been hosting my own podcast for years and I hadn't been utilizing this. Like, why not? You need to constantly grow your new audience. What better way? Because after 30 or 40 minutes listening to a conversation, the trust will already be there. And that's when I realized that guesting isn't just content marketing. It's relationship acceleration, if you like. Every single episode allows you to create content and build a relationship at the same time. Think about it. Most content online lasts what? 10 seconds? Because people scroll or they double tap and then they move on. But podcasts are different, they're evergreen. Someone is literally inviting you into their ears while they're either driving, walking the dog, making coffee, cleaning the house, at the gym. You are actually with them. And in a world where attention spans are shrinking, actually the long form conversation has become one of the fastest ways to build trust. And that is why podcasting works so well for coaches, because coaching is personal. People aren't buying information, they're buying belief, they're buying energy, safety, connection. And podcast guesting creates space for all of that. So let me walk you through the process that we teach. And honestly, this has changed everything for me. I call it the authority guesting framework, and it's built around pretty much 4 core pieces. And it's not complicated, but incredibly powerful when you use them intentionally. Now, step 1 is connections. This is where most people get podcast guesting completely wrong. They pitch themselves like a resume. They've got to fit in all their credentials, their achievements, the certifications. My framework, great podcast guesting is never about proving how impressive you are. It's not about you, it's about the listener. It's about creating relevance. The best guests ask one question before they ever pitch a show. What does this audience desperately need to hear right now? That question changes everything, because now you stop focusing on how can I get booked on a podcast and start focusing on how do I create transformation? That is what makes hosts remember you. That's what gets you referrals. That's what gets you invited back. And honestly, I'd rather speak on a smaller podcast with deeply aligned listeners than a massive podcast where nobody actually cares about my message because it's not a fit. Alignment beats audience size every single time. And relationships with the host will always outperform reach. Now, step 2 is okay, it's the content. This part is pretty big, because most people think good podcast interviews are about teaching. They want to come on and teach. They're not. It's about transformation. Information alone doesn't change people, but identity shifts do. And this is why I structure episodes and interviews using this formula. I start with a story, share your process, deal with the paradigm shift, and then what should the listeners do next part is essential. Now, first of all comes the story, because stories lower resistance and they create emotion because they make people feel seen in the story. Then comes the process. This is where you can give practical tips, not fluff, not theory, maybe some real clarity, but not too much. Then comes the paradigm shift. This is the moment where someone listening suddenly thinks, hang on, maybe the problem isn't me. Or, oh, wow, I've been approaching this completely wrong. That moment is gold, because that's where transformation starts. But it's not you telling them, it's them coming to the conclusion themselves, because they see themselves in the story. And then finally, the proceed part. When you're asked as a guest, where can the listeners find you, or how can they reach out? You guide the listener toward the next step, not aggressively or awkwardly, but what would be the natural next logical step? Because when someone experiences a genuine shift during a conversation, the next step would feel obvious. And that is the difference between content that gets consumed and content that actually converts. Now, this is the big part. Step 3 is the conversion. This is where most podcast guests completely lose momentum after giving an amazing interview. They send people to their homepage. Please, people, don't do this. Or find me on LinkedIn, find me on Instagram. Homepages are usually where momentum goes to die, because people arrive at your website and then they're like, wait, hang on, where do I go? What do I need to click? What's the offer? Is this even relevant to me? And confused people will never buy. Every podcast appearance should lead people to one clear next step, one journey, one outcome, one action. And that's exactly why I created my 4-part mini course, because listeners don't need more noise. They need direction. They need a simple pathway, easy to start. Mine costs $5, so price point is not going to be a problem, but it's got to be powerful enough to create momentum. You want listeners to go from that was interesting to I've got to have this in my business. And that's what having a strategic funnel does, not because funnels are magical, but because clarity creates action and action creates results. Now, let's pause there before we move on. I do want to say something really important here, because this is the piece that most people miss. Getting booked on podcasts is really powerful, but if you don't have a system behind the visibility, the architecture, right, you end up creating attention that goes nowhere. And honestly, this is why I became so passionate about funnels in the first place. And you know what? Because of a relationship created on a podcast, I've joined the team at ClickFunnels. Because a podcast interview shouldn't end with, I hope they follow me. It should lead the listener somewhere intentionally. And this is exactly what ClickFunnels does, right? They are the best on the planet at doing this. Because at the end of the day, your podcast guest appearances are not just conversations. They are entry points into your ecosystem. So when someone hears you on a podcast and thinks, wow, I need this person in my world, you need a journey ready for them. A place where trust can continue building, a place where your story deepens, and where listeners turn into leads and leads turn into clients. And that's what funnels, specific funnels, are really about. Not your website, funnels. Not being salesy, not complicated tech, not manipulative marketing. This is all about creating a clear path for the right people to take the next step. So if you already have all this set out, but you don't have the infrastructure in place, because look, combining that guesting on podcasts with a strategic funnel is going to be one of the fastest ways I've seen coaches build authority and attract high ticket clients consistently. Because instead of chasing people, you're actually guiding them. So if you're listening right now and you know you've already got this, you've got the expertise, you know you've got the message, but your marketing still feels scattered, then I would love to help as a growth advisor with the ClickFunnels team. Quickly book a call. Go to podcastprofitsunleashed.com/ClickFunnels and book a call, because I do help coaches and experts and entrepreneurs simplify their client acquisition process and build funnels that actually fit their business and their personality. No, this isn't cookie cutter nonsense. No overwhelming tech talk, just smart strategy around visibility, messaging, and conversion. So if you want to connect podcasting, authority building, and a real client acquisition system together, then book a call with me to map that out. Yeah, podcastprofitsunleashed.com/ClickFunnels. That's for a funnel. Because look, visibility alone doesn't scale a business. A system does. Now, step 4, getting back to podcasting as a great way, right, is the fact that you're compounding authority. Now, this part is massively overlooked. Every podcast interview is an authority asset. As I said at the beginning, people are trying to come up with all this content for their social media. What if one podcast guest appearance, one conversation can become all your social media clips, can become your reels, emails, absolutely everything you need for your whole social media campaign. You can turn every guest appearance into a blog post that's evergreen. It could be LinkedIn content, LinkedIn article. You could turn it into a lead magnet, webinar stories. So actually, one conversation a week will give you back your time because you no longer have to worry about all the other, trying to keep up with all the other social media content. One interview can create dozens of pieces of content. And the best part about this, it doesn't feel forced because it came from a real conversation, not manufactured content. And this is why podcast guesting is one of the highest leverage strategies available right now, especially if you are a coach, consultant, or service provider, because trust is the currency, and long-form conversation builds trust faster than almost anything else online today, especially with the growth of AI, because people want to listen to real, raw conversations. You can't fake it. So every time you show up and share, you can build a story bank. You can build a load of stories. Everybody has stories to share. And this is what people are going to be craving more and more. So if you want to know more, if you want access to that 4-part mini course, as I said earlier, it's only $5. Go to podcastprofitsunleashed.com/guesting. I'll be back next week. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to today's episode on the Podcast Profits Unleashed podcast. If you're